Hi, thank you everybody who is patiently waiting for us to start tonight. I think we had a few technical hitches, so really sorry for the delay, but thank you if you've carried on waiting for us. Thank you especially to the lovely Katie for coming along this evening to have a chat about what it's like to be a social worker and to talk about some other things, and a really dear friend of ours, Danny Starley, who we both want to talk a little bit about tonight. Just we will start by introducing Katie. Katie Chapman is a freelance social worker these days, and you'll find out a little bit more about all of that later on as we move through some questions this evening. We first met, well, probably about 10 years ago now, do you think, Katie? Maybe something like that?
Something like that.
A while back, anyway.
Yeah.
Working for an independent fostering agency. I was an education specialist, independent on a panel, and Katie was one of the social workers looking after the foster carers there. And we met, and then later on Katie was also doing some work on panels, so we've worked together a little bit, which was really nice, and it's been great to work with Katie, so I'm really glad she could come along and chat a little bit tonight about everything. For those of you who are fans of the Cornish Midwife series, you'll know that Jess, one of the lead characters, has been going through the journey to become a foster carer from about book 2 onwards. And she attended a panel in A Winter's Wish for the Cornish Midwife, which was very much like the panel that I sat on and that Katie was involved with. Today we'll be talking on a little bit more about Spring Surprise for the Cornish Midwife, which is the latest novel in the series and which features the culmination of Jess's journey to become a foster carer, and how a relationship with Dexter, the social worker, really changed her life. Before Katie starts answering some of the questions that we've kind of got prepared from her and anything that comes in tonight from those of you who are listening in, I think we'd both like to talk a little bit about a really inspirational social worker that we both worked with, Danny Starley.
Yeah.
Danny was working for the same agency as that I met Katie at when I met her. And the first time she walked into the room, it was like a light coming on when she talked about the young people that she supported and the work she wanted to do to get the very best outcomes for those young people. It was just, you were carried along on a wave of this enthusiasm and wanting to do best in a child-centred way. So I found working with Danny hugely inspirational, and really sadly, we lost Danny last year to breast cancer. When I was writing a book about social work, I didn't feel like I could dedicate it to anybody but Danny, because she was so hugely inspirational to me and to so many other people. When I was struggling to find the words that would do justice to Danny, and I still didn't quite manage it, but what I wrote in the book was, for Danny, the most amazing social worker I've ever met, who has shown me that the families which are striven for the hardest are also the most beautiful. And Danny strove for her own family. It truly was a beautiful family with her wonderful wife, Rosie, and her 2 gorgeous boys, Charlie and Oscar. So we're probably supposed to be a little bit emotional talking about Danny tonight, but we wanted to kind of start that conversation. So Katie, tell us a little bit about what Danny meant to you and why she was so important in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember the day I met Danny, like it was yesterday. She interviewed me for my job at Foster Care UK, and I can remember kind of like we were sat opposite each other, strangely in the reception area of the building because it was so busy that day. And it wasn't like an interview; it was just an instant. To the point, Jonathan Toomey, who owned the company, said, "Look, I've got to fill these questions out," because we were, I was just chatting for hours.
It was like a meeting of minds for you on that same wavelength.
Yeah, and one of the questions I can remember Danny asking me was whether I would feel that my practice was compromised working for a profit-based fostering agency. And I can remember saying to her, having worked for the local authority, I felt my practice had already been compromised. And I can honestly say the whole time I worked at Foster Care UK, my practice was never compromised. I never felt like I had to make decisions that weren't in the best interest of a child. I was always listened to, and my view and opinion was always given kind of that consideration and recognition of being a professional myself. And I just practicing social work without Danny is a very different.
Yeah, Yeah,
thing
I mean, she
to
just
me.
truly was. She was child-centered in everything she did, wasn't she? And so,
Yeah,
the idea she came up with to kind of help young people
yeah,
were inspirational. I think is probably the only word that you can use.
yeah.
Although she wouldn't, every time we tell her she was inspirational, that she would say, why are you calling me inspiration? I think that kind of sums her up, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It was
Um,
like she just didn't see it.
no. So, she made a huge difference to both of our lives. And I think I just
Yeah,
wanted to kind of flag up that the audio book royalties for A Spring Surprise for the Cornish Midwife in 2022 will be donated to breast cancer now in Danny's memory, because she's kind of taught me so much about fostering and about
yeah,
social work and what it was
yeah,
to be an amazing social worker. So I really
yeah,
felt I wanted to do that for
yeah,
Danny. So I think a link's been put up for anyone else who would like to donate. In Danny's memory, they do some amazing work for triple negative breast cancer in particular, which is what Danny had, and it's one that
yeah,
there's very few treatments for still.
yeah,
So they do some amazing work, and Danny did some incredible fundraising for them herself, didn't
yeah,
she, when she was here? So
yeah. And the
so
lovely Oscar.
yeah, and her
Yeah,
eldest son absolutely did so much that he actually got to meet Prince Charles because of how
yeah.
impressed they were with his
But
fundraising.
even Danny's approach to her when she was diagnosed, and she only let me cry once. She was like, right, that's it, you've done your crying, move on. And
Yeah,
I don't think I've ever met somebody that faced something so huge just with such grace, I suppose. I don't know
yeah.
what the right word is.
No, I think she was, it was at her core, wasn't it? She was brave and courageous and sort of authentic in everything she did, Danny. And I think
Yeah,
that sort of carried on, right through the most difficult journey of her life,
yeah,
which is really, why she was so important to me in this context, and why I really wanted to kind of celebrate that as much as possible
yeah,
in this story. So you're talking about social work being much more difficult without that guiding light and that sort of inspiration for you. But what was it that made you want to be a social worker in the first place? Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming
my
a social
journey.
worker? Yeah.
Yeah, I was working part-time as a teaching assistant at a local primary school, actually the school that I had gone to as a kid myself, and then all three of my children went there. And I'd recently become a single parent. I just had three children, kind of like primary school age. And I kind of thought to myself, this isn't good enough. I need a career, and I need to be earning a decent salary. I'm not one for relying on benefits and kind of child maintenance. So it was either teaching or social work. And as a teaching assistant, I worked with a certain set of children in my class, and I was able to build that real close relationship with those children. And
Yeah.
I could see that actually what they bring into the classroom with them in the morning, they can't leave behind.
Yes.
And like, yes, I can sit there and do extra reading with them, and I can do extra this or extra that, but if we're not tackling the stuff from the outside,
Yeah.
the
Root
bigger
causes.
picture,
Yeah.
we can't make that progress that we want to make. And that was the start, really, of, okay, I'm going to do social work.
Yeah. So did you went to uni full time, part time with the kids at home? How did you manage all of that?
Yeah, I kind of only applied for one. I applied for Kent because
Yeah.
it was on my doorstep, and I did have the kids. And I kind of just did it without really kind of thinking, but what if? It was
Yeah.
just it was almost like I've got to do this.
Yeah. Like a
So,
vocation, really.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so I went full time, did my degree with the kids. When I look back now, I don't know how.
No.
I don't know, but
Well,
I
you were on
did.
placement, were you, for some of the time with that as well? On placement, yeah.
Yeah, in the first year, you just do a 2-week ready for practice placement, and then in the second and third year, you do a 6-month placement.
Right.
Alongside, kind of, you've got lots of kind of written work and essays to do at the same time. So you're kind of working full time, but you're also got the uni work to do, and the work to do while you're at work, and the 3 kids at home. So it was a
Yeah.
challenge, but I think I spent most of the third year crying.
So were there points where you thought, I just can't do this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what was it that carried you through at those times?
Normally my sister.
Right. So having that
Normally my
family
sister saying,
support.
yes, you can. Yes, you can. Yes, you
Yeah.
can.
So you are a debt of gratitude for for getting
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
through there. Yeah, I know that sort of family support, I think, in any roles like that where they're so demanding is really important, isn't it? And
Yeah.
having someone.
Yeah.
In fact, lovely Mary Grand's come along and she's kind of popped a question up on there about, it's a sort of a really stressful and emotional job, and she'd like to know how you cope with that, really.
Learning really to finding strategies to switch off. Really, I can remember, because the workload is so high, I can remember getting home, working at home, and I think it was my youngest said to me, Mum, how comes like you go to work and then you're coming home and you're still working? And it was a little bit of a, right, okay, I need to set these boundaries in place. And that was really how I managed it.
Right.
And just kind of like having the kids around me and a lot of support to offload.
Yeah. I guess it's quite hard to set the boundaries because it's not like a normal 9 to 5 job,
Not.
is it?
No.
And not even if you set the boundaries physically, I guess in your head, it's really even harder to kind of switch off from those.
Very much so. Yeah. Very much so.
So is there anything in particular that you do to kind of or you did particularly when you were working full time in social work to sort of have that downtime and other than offloading to people, was there anything particular you did to kind of relax? Or
reading, mainly reading and music.
Yeah. So
and walking.
Yeah,
I do a lot of walking
to clear your head. So those, I think, those strategies are important, aren't they, for everybody to kind of have those things. So obviously, some people now will go into social work straight from school, do their 3-year degree. You didn't take that route. You decided to take a nice, challenging path to it. Do you ever wish that you'd done it straight from school, or do you think those life experiences that you talked about, the things that you went through, helped you to sort of be more able to be a good social worker?
It's a really difficult one because I did have lots of, I was 38 when I went to uni, 41 by the time I qualified. So I had lots of kind of life experiences behind me. Yet I qualified with a friend, Kate Foster, or she's not Kate Foster now, but she was 21 when she qualified, just about.
Right.
And I can remember having a conversation with my mum and my mum saying, but she hasn't got those life experiences. And I said, well, she hasn't got the same life experiences as me, but at 21, you've still got something to offer in that you can relate better to some of the younger kids. And then she ended up working in youth offending and early offending. And I do believe everybody has something to offer in social work once they're qualified.
So it's about finding the right type of social work for you and your experiences. So have you always been involved in fostering in particular, or are there other areas of social work that you've done?
Yeah, when I qualified, I worked in the children and families team, and then very, very quickly after that, they kind of segregated out. So initially it was like I had a mixed workload of child protection, child in need and child in care. And then it wasn't very long before they separated them out, and I had to pick where I wanted to go, and I chose children in care. So I initially worked with the actual children that were in care, and I also did court proceedings and stuff like that. And then I did a year in adoption, and then from adoption I moved into the independent fostering agency, where I then supported foster carers.
Yeah. So what made you sort of make that transition? What was it that appealed to you about fostering as opposed to the work you were doing?
I think because I always put adoption in the middle as nice, happy social work. Because it is, you're joining, you're making families. And it is lovely, nice social work. But I wanted to go back to the kind of children in care, but from a different aspect. having worked with children that had been in foster placements, some that were great, some that weren't so great, I felt it was a good step to maybe have some influence on improving kind of foster placements for children and young people.
I see. So you could see the impact that those foster carers were having on the young people.
Yeah.
And what you wanted to do is, make those impacts positive by working with the foster carers. So,
and helping foster carers where I can remember one when I first started Foster Care UK, and they'd had a very, very challenging first placement that they had found difficult to manage. So then there were questions about their practice, etc. And I kind of looked at it all and I said, actually, that wasn't the best placement for the child or the foster carers. Let's place someone else with them and let's just see.
Yeah.
And they had a young girl placed. And they did absolutely brilliant with this young girl, and she stayed for, I think, about 18 months. And then they had a lad placed with them. And to my knowledge, he's still there.
Brilliant. So again,
he's done brilliantly.
So a bit like the individual social workers finding the right kind of social work for them, it's a similar thing, isn't it? The matching for foster carers. It's so much about finding the right family for that young person. And what works for one young person doesn't necessarily work for another. So it's really sort of appreciating that individuality and going back to the example that Danny set us. It was about putting the child at the centre of everything, wasn't it? And having that real kind of individual focus. So I've got another question kind of related to that comes up from Jessica Redland, another lovely author from Boldwood Books, who's asking about your comment about private social work, and she wants to know a little bit about how that might differ from local authority. So what would you say about the differences between working independent agency?
That's a little bit. I'm not 100% sure on that because I didn't support foster carers when I worked for the local authority. I worked with the children, so I don't know exactly the kind of.
The general kind of principle, I guess, is that the local authority, they place a lot of the children, don't they, with the private agencies. So often the independent fostering agencies will provide additional services, perhaps to what the local authority can provide. So often they'll have a more holistic packages around things like therapy and support and that kind of thing. So
I found local authority too limiting. And so I guess the only way I could put it is that local authority, they'll for the independent fostering agencies, we tended to get the more challenging young people, and therefore we would provide more training, like you say, and more services and more support services for those foster carers than was provided at local authority.
Yeah, so often the local authorities will place the children in-house if they're able to meet their needs, and when they're not able to meet their needs, they'll quite often sort of refer them to private independent fostering agencies who have got those different specialisms as well. Sometimes they'll do that kind of thing. So that's kind of, I think that's what Jessica's kind of asking, is what's the difference between the two. So that's sort of what that is. What is or was the best thing about being a social worker, and what's the hardest, would you say?
I think the best, it depends in which area I was working. When I worked in the local authority with children and young people, I think the best was actually spending the time with the children and young people. And I can remember my manager used to say to me at all my supervisions, a standard question: did you get the child's wishes and feelings? And I remember having this discussion with her saying, she wanted me to watch telly with her. Yeah, but did you get her wishes and feelings? Yes, she wanted me to watch telly with her. And this young girl in particular wanted to cuddle up, sit on the sofa and watch a film. That's what we did. And to me, that was getting her wishes and feelings. And another time I can remember I had to paddle in the paddling pool with a little girl, and I'm thinking, right, okay, she wanted me to get in properly, and I'm like, I can't do that. So from that perspective, it was fun, and I liked doing that, and if that's what the child wanted to do, that's what I did. I think I frustrated my manager somewhat, but there you go.
So building those connection with the young people and meeting their needs, that was
and actually listening to what they want, not going. One of the biggest things I took from my degree was, if you're going to see a child or a young person, you don't go with an agenda and a set of questions like, what are your wishes and feelings? It's their agenda, not yours.
So it's got to be led by the child, hasn't it? That's the because quite often I think, in my experiences of what the work I've done, is that children in care don't want to necessarily have that label around their neck all the time, do they? They don't want to have this big neon sign saying you are a child in care. They want a normalized family experience, and and it has to be on their terms, how much of that sort of that they want, and how much feedback they want to give, in the form that they want that to be in.
And even I've had conversations with children and young people before LAC review meetings and things like that, where they say, I don't want to go, and I say, well, don't then. If you don't want to go, is the meeting is about you, it's centered around you, and therefore, if you don't want to go, don't. You don't have to. Don't I? No.
So it's about giving them a voice, isn't it? And
and if they wanted their meeting at home as opposed to at school, then they had it at home. And regardless of who wanted it where, actually it's about the child, and the child doesn't want to be dragged out of class to go to a meeting, and then all their schoolmates to say, like, oh, where you been, why are you not in class? It just highlights again that they're different.
Absolutely.
And so I would try my utmost to accommodate what that child might want. But the worst the worst thing in social work, I suppose the worst thing for me was when I removed a baby at birth from birth mum. She knew it was happening. We'd had the conversations and the build up to it, but it, in my view, it doesn't matter how many children have gone before. It's still her child. And she's still a human being.
Absolutely.
And it was a really, really hard thing to do. Even though I knew it was right for the baby.
I don't think things can be in the best interest of the young person, but that doesn't stop it being a hugely emotional and difficult circumstance, does it?
And if you don't feel that, you shouldn't be doing it. Definitely.
That sort of links to another question that's come up again from Jessica about whether you got supervision like a counsellor would. So were you able to talk through those challenging cases and make sure that they weren't, eating away at you or kind of playing on your mind for weeks and months afterwards?
You're supposed to have supervision every month, but in between you can have lots of informal chats. And the team that you work in can break or make you as a social worker, because you need that support. Some supervision was great, some not so great. And again, that would depend on who was doing your supervision as to, whether you could actually talk through the challenges, or whether it was task centered, as in, have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this? Tick it off, off you go. That's not supervision.
No.
So definitely you have to be able to talk that through. And some of the best supervisions I had were in an office environment. And I can remember we had a social work assistant in our office, and I fought to keep her in our office because they saw a very different side to what we did with families. They worked in a very different capacity. And so they had a lot to bring. You would be discussing things and they would pop up, she would pop up and say, well, have you thought about it from this angle? No, actually, no, I hadn't. And so those discussions I always class as extra supervision, really.
It's a real learning on the job and kind of working through the experiences. So the team around you, the other social workers you work with, I guess they're paramount to how you enjoy the job and how you cope with it all, really. having those things.
Yeah.
That lovely comment there from Claire McDonough. I hope I'm pronouncing your surname right, Claire. Apologies if not. But she's saying, "Hi, Katie. It's really refreshing to hear your views on this. As a foster carer of 3 siblings for 11 years, she's never made them fill in forms or attend meetings. They're part of her family, and they need to feel this." I think that is so important, isn't it?
I know this young lady, and she is like me. She has fought for those children for years, and they are truly part of her family.
Yeah.
And that, I hope whatever agency she works for, I hope she is kind of like one of their leading examples of this is how it's done.
Yeah, absolutely. It's lovely to get that comment from somebody who's in the thick of it, and we both know what a hugely challenging job it is, and I don't think that's always appreciated. I think particularly in the last couple of years with the pandemic and the work that foster carers have done, homeschooling and stuff like that, it's been absolutely incredible. So
and not even having social workers going to their house.
Yeah. So that support not being in the same way, absolutely. I admire them hugely anyway, but over the last 2 years, I think it's been absolutely incredible the work they've undertaken. So it's really lovely to have Claire listening along with us this evening. So that's great. I guess there are times that when you're working with, you talked about difficult situations about taking the baby off someone, but there are other situations where you're working with maybe other professionals or foster carers or birth families where there's scope for conflict in your job. When that kind of thing happens, if you face conflict, how do you deal with that and kind of stay calm and sort of, maintain your professionalism in what must be sometimes some really challenging conversations?
I'm quite firm.
Yeah.
I've had a few dads not happy with the decision that I've made and information that I've given them, and I've been quite calm, and I've explained my reasoning, and if that doesn't help and they escalate, I just give I kind of used to say, look, I'm not here to take abuse or language. If you continue, I'll end the phone call and we'll try and discuss it another time. And invariably, to be honest, that would simmer it down. And I guess it depends how you listen to that person, and if you hear what they're trying to tell you and can unpick it, you can respond appropriately. As opposed to if you respond in that kind of way as well, it's just going to escalate.
I guess
only got thrown out of one person's house.
I guess it's actually acknowledging that they have got a point of view, and that's a really important part of it, isn't it?
And even then, when this mum threw me out, I understood why. I got it, and I was like, okay, I'll go. I understand what you're saying, and I understand why you're upset. So I think that
you have to have a huge amount of empathy for everybody. Even as you say, you might know things are right, you still can have empathy for everyone involved, can't you?
Which is absolutely.
A really hugely important part of the role of a social worker, I think. A question here from Joanne Slaughter, asking if you would ever consider fostering yourself. Now, I have to say, the more I have learned about being a foster carer, the more I know my limitations. And as much as I might like to do it, I just I don't think I'm resilient enough personally to face some of the rejection that they have to take, to build those relationships and to break those barriers down. So I know I'm not resilient enough to do it. But what's your view on that, Katie? Did you ever
I think there's a couple of things. One, resilience. I would struggle massively. Definitely, particularly like with a child with emotional difficulties and not getting the support and the services. But then I know that would then turn into frustration, and because I know what should be done and how things should be done and the support, I would get myself in trouble.
You know too much. That's a problem now.
I would definitely get myself in trouble.
I take, as I said before, huge admiration, but actually it's being involved in it has sort of really taught me my limits. So I think that it's important. And I think when foster carers come along to be assessed and things like that, it's important that they recognise what's right for them and what their limitations are. I think perhaps I could do respite, having someone come along and doing the fun part and letting them have sort of a weekend of all the activities and stuff, but it's a day in, day out kind of resilience and that kind of building up that young person and giving the young person resilience that I think is a real huge skill set that I know I haven't got. So,
and I think like you in the book where Jess is approved, she's going to do respite initially because she wants to carry on being a midwife.
Yeah.
And the baby lands at her doorstep. I think that was a very well portrayed in how she got so attached to that baby.
Yeah.
And
that's
I would have made the same decision as the social worker, and there is no way I would have allowed her to keep that baby, because she wouldn't have been able to safeguard. And you could see how the impact on her.
It's the same emotional kind of thing, a different kind of perspective, but the same emotional situation as you had where you had to take the decision you took previously, and it's such a hugely sort of emotive piece of work to do, isn't it? And we had another question from lovely Jessica about foster panels, which you've both been involved with, and asking us a little bit about what that involves. So so I've been involved in foster panels for 14 years come April now, and that's as a chair, initially as an education specialist, because my background is in education in various sort of areas of the curriculum, and working particularly with care leavers was the thing that kind of made me want to get involved. I was working at a large FE college, and we'd have the 16-year-olds back then who'd suddenly be expected to leave their care setting, manage independently by themselves with no support, because they'd be moved on from the foster carers, because at that age, at that time it was 16 that they were getting moved on from and I just thought, this is not right. How can they, who's ready at 16 to be completely independent and not have that support? So I got involved in that way, to kind of working on the panels. And what happens is they do a really big assessment, like anyone who's read Jess's story will have done what's called a form assessment, which goes into the details of someone's life in real minutiae, doesn't it? It's quite invasive in terms of what it asks them to reflect on, and it is testing those things like their own resilience. If they've overcome personal trauma and things themselves and had difficult times, that's fine, and actually that can be a real strength. But what's important is to make sure they've dealt with those issues and they've used it to kind of give them strength, rather than if there's still unresolved issues for them in their own life, that means that they can't support young people, because the work they do with young people can often be triggering for people as well if they've had similar experiences. So there's a huge assessment that they undertake, and then they come to panel at the end of that, after they've been through a number of visits with their assessing social worker, and that's all been kind of looked at through supervision, and all the checks and everything are in place. And then panel are kind of almost the last layer of kind of evaluating the robustness of that assessment, and asking any unresolved questions. So you've got a group of specialists on the panel. There'll be social workers like Katie, and you've sat on panel as a social worker, Katie, haven't you? And then education specialists like myself, people with a background in medical, people who have either been in care themselves previously, who are brilliant on panel because they really know what it feels like to be the child, and people who are currently foster carers or have been foster carers. So that kind of range of professions and backgrounds enables us to kind of look at, or everyone to look at the assessment from a different perspective, and then we kind of ask further questions, often that fit with our own kind of experiences that we might want to explore further, as Jess experienced in A Winter's Wish for the Cornish Midwife. And then the panel will make a recommendation about whether or not to approve. But there is one layer after that, which is a decision maker who makes the final decision. But it's I've always found panel work hugely interesting. Did you enjoy it, Katie, when you were on panel?
Yeah, because that's the ultimate, to me, that's the ultimate opportunity for any professional sitting on panel, whether that be a social worker, yourself, a person that was in care, anybody that's there that's had access to that information to read. That's the opportunity to raise any, like you say, any concerns that you may have picked up when you've read all that information, and just kind of tease that out a little bit. And because it is so important to make sure that they've got those skills and the resilience to care for a looked after child.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, and it's important that you have all those different layers, isn't it? Because each of us brings our own perspective to that, and it is a really grueling procedure that foster carers have to go through. And then, after their initial assessment, they come back, after a year for an annual review, and on it goes throughout their career. So it's
and rightly so.
Yeah,
I think, again, rightly so. And I think even panel for foster carers that have already been approved, but like you say, is their kind of like review every year, that should still be treated the same as when they come to panel for the first time, because a year is a long time for a foster carer. Lots of things will have happened in that year, and it all needs to be thoroughly looked into.
Yeah. So it's a really robust procedure, and as you say, rightly so. But it's quite, each time it's quite a huge thing for the foster carers to go through, isn't it? So you can understand how, as hopefully was reflected in the book, what a process it is, which is why the actual process of Jess becoming a foster carer is spread across 3 books, because it's not a quick fix to actually get into that role, and it's something that's ongoing, and reviewed. So in terms of your career, what do you feel is next for you as a social worker? And have you got any plans for other things? I think I know the answer to that.
You do know the answer to that. Yeah, so I took a break 2 years ago, I think, a year and a half. Same year my dad died, basically. I got to a point where I thought, I'm not doing the job to the best of my ability now. And I suffer with fibromyalgia as well, which impacts on my whole life, really. So I decided I'd take a break, and then I sew as a hobby. And then I thought it'd be a really good idea to go back to doing a foundation degree in fashion and textiles. Stupidly thinking, because it was practical based, that it would be quite cushy and easy, and it's not. There's a lot of work, but it's really good fun. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, so it's nice to have that kind of creative side, which is really different, isn't it, from the work
really different, yeah.
So you're still involved in social work at the moment? Are you doing some independent, some freelance social work?
I'd like to be. Yeah, I'd like to, carry on doing bits and pieces, just not to the level that I was doing before.
So have you done assessments before for foster carers? Kind of
not for foster carers, but it's a very, very similar assessment for adopters, except it's called a prospective adopters report, and it's set out exactly the same. I haven't gone through both of them to see if they're all exactly the same, but it's very, very similar, and they are so incredibly in depth. They're quite grueling for both parties. So, for the prospective adopter or foster carer, it is, and kind of for the social worker doing it, you take all that, you delve so deep into people's backgrounds. I can remember a guy that I was assessing them to adopt, and you do a session individually with each of them, and his individual session I had to split over two days, because it was just, he was so open, but his background was brutal. And then so it was really hard for me to listen to, but you could see it was really hard for him. So it got to a point where I said, actually, I think we've done enough for today. Let's do the rest another day. And his main worry was whether it would stop him adopting. And I said, no, actually, it's a positive, because some of the things that he said, you could see he would know exactly how a child would feel. Dropped off at the doorstep, things like that. And and they did get a placement, and I know that he would have been a brilliant adopter.
So that those happy ever afters that were really lovely about the adoption side of things. But I think again it sort of shows how empathetic, and how there is no rule book in a way, is there, for social work. You can't kind of follow things to the letter. It's about understanding that individual person, and actually the approach you took in that situation enabled you to get the most out of him and for him to be able to express those things. But you know, if you'd gone in there with a kind of no, you've got to do this by this, and this is the way it's got to go, you know, the conversation would have been, you'd have found out far less, and it wouldn't have kind of enriched the process nearly so much with it. So,
and it's like in the books with Jess and her history, you know, she says some things in it that she knows exactly how that a child is going to feel when they're placed with her, etc. But it also covers, you know, it talks about her past and how she can't, what the reasons why she can't have children, but it doesn't do it in a blame way. And what it does is it shows that actually she understands why she did those things, why she was so promiscuous, and the damage it did. And, you know, from my point of view, then that should be able to support a young child, a young lady going through puberty, etc. And all of those things are important.
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, the trauma can go two ways, can't it, that people have gone through. If they've resolved it and dealt with it and have that understanding about the reasons behind those behaviours and can help a young person to work through similar things, then it's actually hugely beneficial to have had those experiences and have that understanding. But I think it's when those things aren't resolved, as we've said, that it can kind of cause, you know, patterns of behaviours and the triggers that we talked about that are sometimes so difficult, and you know, another layer of challenge both for foster carers and actually for social workers themselves. So a lot of social workers have often come in, you know, via those similar kind of routes where they've been through quite some significant experiences themselves. Often, you know, a lot of social workers that I've met have had some quite traumatic background.
I mean, going back to the couple I said for adoption, where he had a really, really difficult challenge in childhood, she had completely the opposite. And I can remember her saying to me that not being able to fall pregnant was the first time something had happened to her where she couldn't have what she wanted, but it was kind of like, oh. And I would imagine that out of the two of them, that she would manage, or he would cope better and would have more resilience than her.
Because he's built that up over time. Absolutely. Grace was asking about how you switch off and relax. I think we kind of already covered that, because you talked about music and reading and those kind of. And obviously, sewing probably started off as a hobby, but now it's become more consuming. And I know you did tons of stuff as well during you know, lockdown with the masks and stuff, which was absolutely brilliant, and really pretty ones, which was so lovely for people to be able to have. But I wondered what you feel about the advice you'd give to someone who came to you and said, Katie, I'm thinking of training to be a social worker. What would you say?
Why? I want to know why. Because I think that's really important. I would say, depending on their reasons why, yes, do it. But I wouldn't want them to go into it with rose-tinted glasses, thinking that they're kind of almost got a cape on and they're Superwoman or Superman, because that's not the case. If you're looking to just make everybody's lives better, it doesn't work that way.
I think there was something in one of the earlier books that I wrote, kind of from experiences that I've drawn, where it's a lovely thing for people to say, you know, they want to become a foster carer because they want to, you know, make a difference, which is that they do, but it's about being realistic about what that looks like, what that.
I was just going to say that. Well, what's that look like?
That difference might not be as kind of huge as they think. It could become quite a minor thing. But if they're going into it with a kind of Miss World answer, like, you know, I want world peace, or, you know, that kind of thing. I think it's about being realistic, isn't it? About those, you know, what you can achieve, and striving for those best outcomes for young people, but actually knowing what a hard slog that is, and the sometimes tiny progress actually might be huge for that young person.
Absolutely.
But it sometimes can be very challenging for both foster carers and social workers to accept that that's as far as that progress is going to be, I think, isn't it? It's a really sort of hard job from that point of view. Question from Nicole, asking whether any of your family members or friends have been inspired to adopt or foster as a result of your work.
Yes, Nicole. That's my friend, and she adopted a little girl a few years ago, and we spoke a lot before, and I did not sugarcoat it, because there's no point in sugarcoating things, in my view. And it has been really challenging for her or them as a family. And they've got a birth child as well, and he's been amazing. But it hasn't been an easy ride for her or for them. And we've had plenty of conversations, and I've certain things that lots and lots of looked after adopted children do. So many of them have issues around food, and they use it as control. And it is kind of just highlighting that normally it's those little things that they're the only things they've ever been able to control in their life. So yeah, Nicole, and she's doing a really good job.
Oh yeah, it's lovely to hear that as well, but Nicole's story. So thanks for coming along, Nicole, as well. But I think we talk about adoption being as that happy ever after, but the fact is that it's not that simple, is it? With adoption, quite often, things come out later on, and the trauma comes out that the young people have often experienced, and it can be. That can bring some hugely challenging situations about. And when you've adopted, it's that kind of finality to it that fostering doesn't have, and you've got to kind of try and work through those things. And in some ways, adoption has just as many, if not more, challenges than fostering.
Because
it's not just a neat little everything's tied up in a bow. It's lovely when it works out, and hopefully everyone sees through those difficult times, or most people do, but it isn't as easy as sometimes people think it is.
No, I never use the word in adoption or the phrase forever family. Ever, because I've worked with at least 5 children that were adoption breakdowns. And for those children and the adoptive parents is so traumatic, because they've been sold this, it's their forever family, and it hasn't worked. And so I just never used it, and I always said growing up family. Because you'll grow up to, it could be you grow up with that family for 5 years, or it could be 15 years, or it could be forever. But it what is forever?
It's sort of important to recognise those challenges, and why, again, that the matching for adoption is so important, to even more important than for fostering, because it is that sense that there's hopefully it's going to be a much more long-term piece of work. A couple of really lovely comments from Laura, McKay and Joanne, sort of to say, I'd like to say how proud I am of Katie, and Joanne is saying me too. So it's really nice to see those, that really hard work that you've done, those challenging pieces of work. And I think social workers, I know, get a bad rap sometimes, and I do think you're so often caught between a rock and a hard place. When you talked about that case earlier about taking that baby away from that mother, that's a kind of lose-lose situation. You're doing the right thing for the baby, but such a traumatic thing to have to do. So plans for the future, when you finish your current degree, are you going to focus on your sewing, or would you think you'll always be there'll always be some social work in the mix somewhere?
I think I'll always be passionate about social work. I think it will always pull me back. I think social workers, they're so they're miles apart, aren't they? But they're both of them will always run parallel in what I want to be doing.
No, thank you so much. I think we've got another similar question to what we had answered about how you deal with particularly difficult cases from Paula, but I think we kind of dealt with that one earlier on. So hopefully, if Paula can listen back later on, she'll be able to hear about how you cope with that, and how important the support of everyone around you, and particularly that those people that come along in our lives, like we both had with Danny. Having someone like that you work with can just change things completely for you, can't it? In your social work, as you say, once that figure's gone, that can make it harder to adjust. But having someone like that who is, for me, defined the word inspirational, really, and kind of carried everyone along with her, sort of with her drive to just bring those best outcomes for young people is what you need. I think is what every sort of social worker could do with somebody like that on their side, couldn't they, really?
She just worked. She worked the whole way through being her illness. And I can remember the last day I went to see her was a Thursday, and she just had a meeting. And I think 5 days later, she was gone. And you think that is how dedicated she was. And some people,
it wasn't a job for Danny, was it? It was
No.
it was who she was. So I think in that,
because some people said, how can she still be working? But it was who she was. It was part of her.
I think it energized her to do those things, and the legacy that she's kind of left for young people, it stands testament to that. And I think we both feel hugely privileged to have worked with her.
Absolutely.
So if anybody out there wants to donate, please do donate to Breast Cancer Now in Danny's name, and carry it. And as her family, her lovely wife Rosie, and particularly our older son Oscar, are still fundraising hugely for Breast Cancer Now.
Still doing it.
Even though it can't help Danny, they're so focused on continuing that legacy. So please do donate if you can. Thank everybody for coming along tonight. Thank you so much again, Katie, for coming and chatting away. It's been really interesting and so nice to see. And we will have that glass of wine or
we will
together sometime soon. And I can't thank you enough. So thanks everybody for coming. Thank you for all the questions. Lovely to see everyone.
When's book 5 out?
July.
Too long.
I know. Thank you, everybody.